Hello guys and gals, and this is part 24 of our reading of George Orwell's 1984. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's right. If it's wrong, it will be right in the title. I'm pretty sure that we are up to number 24 by now. And, so yeah. Anyways, first of all, as always, we go over the copyright information. Right here it says it's a copyright 1961 is the latest copyright. All rights reserved, including the right to reproduce this book in portion thereof in any form. So yeah, that's precisely what I'm doing. So, and in the last episode, Julia and Winston were caught, and they were basically shipped off to the Ministry of Love, which is basically the Ministry of Torture. And yeah, things are not looking good at all for, like, Winston. I don't know if we ever hear from Julia again, because according to Winston, he never actually sees Julia again or anything like that, but we're going to have to see. Anyways, also, Appleforth, or Ampleforth, I forget what his name was in the prison cell with Winston for a little bit. And now Parsons is, which is his flatmate. And we're going to find out why Parsons is in the cell with Winston. Okay, so, what are you in for? Said Winston. Thought crime, said Parsons, almost blubbering. The tone of his voice implied at once a complete admission of his guilt and a sort of incredulous horror that such a word could be applied to himself. He paused opposite Winston and began eagerly appealing to him. You don't think they'll shoot me, do you, old chap? They don't shoot you if you haven't actually done anything, only thoughts? Which you can't help, but I know they give you a fair hearing. Oh, I trust them for that. They'll know my record, won't they? You know what kind of chap I was, not a bad chap in my way. No, not brainy, of course, but keen. I tried to do my best for the party, didn't I? I'll get off with 5 years, don't you think, or even 10 years? A chap like me could make himself pretty useful in a labor camp. They wouldn't shoot me for going off the rails just once. Are you guilty? Said Winston. Of course I'm guilty, cried Parsons, with a servile glance at the telescreen. You don't think the party would arrest an innocent man, do you? His frog-like face grew calmer, and even took on a slightly sanctimonious expression. Thought crime is a dreadful thing, old man, he said sententiously. It's insidious. It can get a hold of you without you even knowing it. Do you know how it got a hold of me? In my sleep. Yes, that's a fact. There I was, working away, trying to do my bit. Never knew I had any bad stuff in my mind at all. And then I started talking in my sleep. Do you know what they heard me saying? He sank his voice like someone who is obliged for medical reasons to utter an obscenity. Down with Big Brother. Yes, I said that. Said it over and over again. It seems between you and me, old man. I'm glad they got me before it went any further. Do you know what I'm gonna say when I go up before the tribunal? Thank you. I'm going to say thank you for saving me before it was too late. Who denounced you? Said Winston. It was my little daughter, said Parsons with a sort of doleful pride. She listened at the keyhole, heard what I was saying, and nipped off to the patrols the very next day. Pretty smart for a nipper of 7, eh? I don't bear her any grudge for it. In fact, I'm proud of her. It shows I brought her up in the right spirit anyway. He made a few more jerky motions up and down several times, casting a longing glance at the lavatory pan, and he suddenly ripped down his shorts. Excuse me, old man, he said. I can't help it. It's the waiting. He plumped his large posterior onto the lavatory pan. Winston covered his face with his hands. Smith, yelled the voice from the telescreen. 6079 Smith, W. Uncover your face. No face is covered in the cells. Winston uncovered his face. Parsons used the lavatory loudly and abruptly. And abundantly. It then turned out that the plug was defective and the cell stank abominably for hours afterwards. Parsons was removed. More prisoners came in and went mysteriously. A woman, was consigned to room 101, and Winston noticed, seemed to shrivel and turn a different color when she heard the words. A time came when, if it had been morning when he was brought here, then it would be midnight. Oh, no, wait. Let me read this again. A time came when, if it had been morning when he was brought here, it would be afternoon, or if it had been afternoon, then it would be midnight. There were 6 prisoners in the cell, men and women, all very still. Opposite Winston, there sat a man with a chinless, toothy face, exactly like that of some large, harmless rodent. His fat, mottled cheeks were so pouched at the bottom that it was difficult not to believe that he had a little store of food tucked away there. His pale gray eyes flitted timorously from face to face and turned quickly away again when he caught anyone's eye. The door opened and another prisoner was brought in, whose appearance sent a momentary chill through Winston. He was a commonplace, mean-looking man who might have been an engineer or technician of some kind, but what was startling was the emaciation of his face. It was like a skull. Because of its thinness, the mouth and eyes looked disproportionately large, and the eyes seemed filled with a murderous, unpleasant hatred for somebody or something. Now, I forgot to mention the thing. What's it called? I do have to say that this does get very, very violent, so I should have mentioned that at the beginning of the video. But I'm mentioning it now, that if you're sensitive to violence, then you should probably quit watching now, because it's about to get really, really violent. The man sat down on the bench at a little distance from Winston. Winston did not look at him again, but the tormented skull-like face was as vivid in his mind as though it had been straight in front of his eyes. Suddenly, he realized what was the matter. The man was dying of starvation. The same thought seemed to occur almost simultaneously to everyone in the cell. There was a very faint stirring all the way around the bench. The eyes of the chinless man kept flitting towards the skull-faced man, then turning guiltily away, then being dragged back by an irresistible attraction. Presently he began to fidget on his seat. At last he stood up, waddled clumsily across the cell, dug down into the pocket of his overalls, and with an abashed air held out a grimy piece of bread to the skull-faced man. There was a furious, deafening roar from the telescreen. The chinless man jumped in his tracks. The skull-faced man had quickly thrust his hand behind his back, as though demonstrating to all the world that he refused the gift. "Bumstead!" roared the voice. 2713, Bumstead, J. Let fall the piece of bread. The chinless man dropped the piece of bread on the floor. "Remain standing where you are," said the voice. "Face the door. Make no movement." The chinless man obeyed. His large, pouchy cheeks were quivering uncontrollably. The door clanged open. As a young officer entered and stepped aside, there emerged from behind him a short, stumpy guard with enormous arms and shoulders. He took his stand opposite the chinless man, and then, at a signal from the officer, let free a frightful blow, with all the weight of his body behind it, full in the chinless man's mouth. The force of it seemed almost to knock him clear of the floor. His body was flung across the cell and fetched up against the base of the lavatory seat. For a moment he lay as though stunned. with dark blood oozing from his mouth and nose. A very faint whimpering or squeaking, which seemed unconscious, came out of him. Then he rolled over and raised himself unsteadily on hands and knees amid a stream of blood and saliva. The two halves of his dental plate fell out of his mouth. The prisoner sat very still, his hands crossed on their knees. The prisoners sat very still, their hands crossed on their knees. The chinless man climbed back into his place. Down one side of his face, the flesh was darkening. His mouth had swollen into a shapeless, cherry-colored mass with a black hole in the middle of it. From time to time, a little blood dribbled onto the breast of his overalls. His gray eyes still flitted from face to face, more guiltily than ever, as though he were trying to discover how much the others despised him for his humiliation. The door opened with a small gesture. The officer indicated the skull-faced man. "Room 101, he said. There was a gasp and a flurry at Winston's side. The man had actually flung himself on his knees on the floor, with his hands clasped together. "Comrade, officer," he cried, "you don't have to take me to that place. Haven't I told you everything already? What else is there you want to know? There is nothing I wouldn't confess, nothing. Just tell me what it is, and I'll confess it straight off. Write it down, and I'll sign it. Anything, not room 101. "Room 101, said the officer. The man's face, already very pale, turned a color Winston would not have believed possible. It was definitely unmistakably a shade of green. "Do anything to me," he yelled. "You've been starving me for weeks. Finish it off and let me die. Shoot me, hang me, sentence me to 25 years. Is there somebody else you want me to give away? Just say who it is, and I'll tell you anything you want. I don't care who it is or what you do to them. I've got a wife and 3 children. The biggest of them isn't 6 years old. You can take the whole lot of them and cut their throats in front of my eyes, and I'll stand by and watch it. But not room 101. "Room 101, said the officer. The man looked frantically around at the other prisoners, as though with some idea that he could put another victim in his own place. His eyes settled on the smashed face of the chinless man. He flung out a lean arm. "That's the man you caught. You ought to be taken, not me," he shouted. "You didn't hear what he was saying after they bashed his face. Give me a chance and I'll tell you every word of it. He's the one that's against the party, not me." The guard stepped forward. The man's voice rose to a shriek. "You didn't hear him," he repeated. "Something went wrong with the telescreen. He's the one you want. Take him, not me." The 2 sturdy guards had stooped to take him by the arm, but just at that moment he flung himself across the floor of the cell and grabbed on to the iron leg that supported the bench. He had set up a wordless howling like an animal. The guards took hold of him to wrench him loose, but he clung on with astonishing strength. For perhaps 20 seconds they were hauling at him. The prisoners sat quiet, their hands crossed over their knees, looking straight in front of them. The howling stopped. The man had no breath left for anything except hanging on. Then there was a different kind of cry. A kick from a guard's boot had broken the fingers of one of his hands. They dragged him to his feet. "Room 101, said the officer. The man was led out, walking unsteadily, with head sunken, nursing his crushed hand. All the fight gone out of him. A long time passed. If it had been midnight when the skull-faced man was taken away, it was morning. If morning, it was afternoon. Winston was alone, and had been alone for hours. The pain of sitting on the narrow bench was such that often he got up and walked about, unreproved by the telescreen. The piece of bread still lay where the chinless man had dropped it. At the beginning, it needed a hard effort not to look at it, but presently hunger gave way to thirst. His mouth was sticky and evil-tasting. The humming sound and the unvarying white light induced a sort of faintness, an empty feeling inside his head. He would get up because the ache in his bones was no longer bearable, and then would sit down again almost at once because he was too dizzy to make sure of staying on his feet. Whenever his physical sensations were a little under control, the terror returned. Sometimes with a fading hope, he thought of O'Brien and the razor blade. It was thinkable that the razor blade might arrive concealed in his food, if he were ever fed. More dimly, he thought of Julia somewhere or other. She was suffering, perhaps far worse than he. She might be screaming with pain at the moment, he thought. If I could save Julia by doubling my own pain, would I do it? Yes, I would, but that was merely an intellectual decision, taken because he knew that he ought to take it. He did not feel it. In this place you could not feel anything except pain and the foreknowledge of pain. Besides, was it possible when you were actually suffering it to wish for any reason whatever that Besides, was it possible when you were actually suffering it to wish for any reason whatever that your own pain should increase? But that question was not answerable yet. The boots were approaching again. The door opened. O'Brien came in. Winston started to his feet. The shock of the sight had driven all caution out of him. For the first time in many years, he forgot the presence of the telescreen. "They've got you too," he cried. "They got me a long time ago," said O'Brien with a mild, almost regretful irony. He stepped aside. From behind him there emerged a broad-chested guard with a long black truncheon in his hand. You knew this, Winston," said O'Brien. Don't deceive yourself. You did know it. You have always known it." Yes, he saw now. He had always known it, but there was no time to think of that. All he had eyes for was the truncheon in the guard's hand. It might fall anywhere: on his crown, on the tip of his ear, on the upper arm, on the elbow. The elbow. He had slumped to his knees, almost paralyzed, clasping the stricken elbow with his other hand. Everything had exploded into yellow light. Inconceivable that one blow could cause such pain. The light cleared, and he could see the other two looking down at him. The guard was laughing at his contortions. One question at any rate was answered. Never for any reason on earth could you wish for an increase of pain. Of pain you could only wish one thing: that it should stop. Nothing in the world was so bad as physical pain. In the face of pain there is no heroes, he thought, over and over as he writhed on the floor, clutching uselessly at his disabled left arm. We are to part 2. He was lying on something that felt like a camp bed, except that it was higher off the ground, and he was fixed down in some way so that he could not move. Light that seemed stronger than usual was falling on his face. O'Brien was standing at one side, looking down at him intently. At the other side of him stood a man in a white coat holding a hypodermic syringe. Even after his eyes were opened, he looked in his... He took in his surroundings. Only gradually. He had the impression of swimming up into the room from some quite different world. A sort of underwater world far beneath it. How long he had been down there he did not know. Since the moment when they arrested him, he had not seen darkness or daylight. Besides, his memories were not continuous. There had been times when consciousness, even the sort of consciousness that one had in sleep, had stopped, dead, and started again after a blank interval. But whether the intervals were of days or weeks or even seconds, there was no way of knowing. With the first blow on the elbow, the nightmare had started. Later, he was to realize that all that then happened was merely a routine interrogation to which nearly all prisoners were subjected. There was a long range of crimes, espionage, sabotage, and the like, to which everyone had to confess as a matter of course. The confession was a formality, though the torture was real. How many times he had been beaten, how long the beatings had continued, he could not remember. Always there were 5 or 6 men in black uniforms at him simultaneously. Sometimes it was with fists, sometimes it was truncheons, sometimes it was with steel rods, sometimes it was boots. There were times when he rolled about on the floor, as shameless as an animal, writhing his body this way and that in an endless, hopeless effort to dodge the kicks and simply inviting more and yet more kicks in the ribs, in the belly, in the elbow, on the shins, in the groin, in his testicles, on the bone at the base of his spine. There were times when it went on and on until the cruel, wicked, unforgivable thing seemed to him not that the guards continued to beat him, but that he could not force himself into losing consciousness. There were times when his nerve so forsook him that he began shouting for mercy, even before the beatings began, when the mere sight of a fist drawn back for a blow was enough to make him pour forth a confession of real and imaginary crimes. There were other times when he started out with the resolve of confessing nothing, when every word had to be forced out of him between gasps of pain, and there were times when he feebly tried to compromise, when he said to himself, "I will confess, but not yet. I must hold on till the pain becomes unbearable. 3 more kicks, 2 more kicks, and then I will tell them what they want." Sometimes he was beaten till he could hardly stand, then flung like a sack of potatoes onto the stone floor of the cell, left to recuperate for a few hours, and then taken out and beaten again. There were also longer periods of recovery. He remembered them dimly because they were spent chiefly in sleep or stupor. He remembered a cell with a plank bed, a sort of shelf sticking out from the wall, and a tin wash basin, and meals of hot soup, and bread, and sometimes coffee. He remembered a surly barber arriving to scrape his chin and crop his hair, and businesslike, unsympathetic men in white coats feeling his pulse, tapping his reflexes, turning up his eyelids, running harsh fingers over him in search of broken bones, and shooting needles into his arm to make him sleep. The beatings grew less frequent and became mainly a threat, a horror to which he could be sent back at any moment when his answers were unsatisfactory. His questioners now were not ruffians in black uniforms, but party intellectuals, little round men with quick movements and flashing spectacles, who worked on him in relays over periods which lasted, he thought he could not be sure, 10 or 12 hours at a stretch. These other questioners saw to it that he was in constant slight pain, but it was not chiefly pain that they relied on. They slapped his face, wrung his ears, pulled his hair, made him stand on one leg, refused to let him urinate, shone glaring lights on his face until his eyes ran with water, but the aim of this was simply to humiliate him and destroy his power of arguing and reasoning. Their real weapon was the merciless questioning that went on and on, hour after hour, tripping him up, laying traps for him, twisting everything that he said, convincing him at every step of lies and self-contradiction, until he began weeping as much for shame as for nervous fatigue. Sometimes he would weep half a dozen times in a single session. Most of the time they screamed abuse at him and threatened at every hesitation to deliver him over to the guards again. But sometimes they would suddenly change their tune, call him comrade, appeal to him in the name of Ingsoc and Big Brother, and ask him sorrowfully whether even now he was not enough loyal. He had not enough loyalty to the party left to make him wish to undo the evil he had done. When his nerves were in rags after hours of questioning, even this appeal could reduce him to sniveling tears. In the end, the nagging voices broke him down more completely than the boots and fists of the guards. He became simply a mouth that uttered, a hand that signed whatever was demanded of him. His sole concern was to find out what they wanted him to confess, and then confess it quickly before the bullying started anew. He confessed to the assassination of eminent party members, the distribution of seditious pamphlets, embezzlement of public funds, sale of military secrets, sabotage of every kind. He confessed that he had been a spy in the pay of East Asian government as far back as 1968. He confessed that he was a religious believer, an admirer of capitalism, and a sexual pervert. He confessed that he had murdered his wife, although he knew, and his questioners must have known, that his wife was still alive. He confessed that for years he had been in personal touch with Goldstein and had been a member of an underground organization which had included almost every human being he had ever known. It was easier to confess everything and implicate everybody. Besides, in a sense, it was all true. It was true that he had been an enemy of the party, and in the eyes of the party there was no distinction between the thought and the deed. There were also memories of another kind. They stood out in his mind disconnectedly, like pieces with blackness all around them. He was in a cell, which might have been either dark or light, because he could see nothing except a pair of eyes. Near at hand, some kind of instrument was ticking slowly and regularly. The eyes grew larger and more luminous. Suddenly, he floated out of his seat, dived into the eyes, and was swallowed up. He was strapped into a chair, surrounded by dials. Under dazzling light, a man in a white coat was reading the dials. There was a tramp of heavy boots outside. The door clanged open. The waxen-faced officers marched in, followed by two guards. "Room 101, said the officer. The man in the white coat did not turn around. He did not look at Winston either. He was looking only at the dials. We are going to pick this up. We made it to page 201. We have been reading from George Orwell's 1984, and just realized the bookmark's upside down, but that's okay. Wait. If you like this content, make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload. And if you want to support me in any way, all that information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.